Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch Hour Lecture. My name is Tricia Rothman. I'm a member of the Lunch Hour Lecture Committee, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our lecturer today and to man the questions. We will be having a Slido interactive questions as well, which will be taken care of by Emma down there. And I just want to tell you about Thursday's lecture, which is entitled Shake, Rattle and Roll, Communicating Lethal Risks. And it's being given by Dr. Karina Fernley of the Department of Science and Technology Studies. But now it's my very great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Jenni Rodd. Her first degree is from Cambridge, Natural Sciences with a first, and her third degree is also from Cambridge and one in between from Edinburgh. And she's been at University College since 2003, and we welcome her.
Thank you very much. Hello, is the volume about right? Everybody hear me okay? Well, thank you all very much for giving up your lunch hour to come and listen to me. What I'm going to be talking about today is the processes that hopefully are going on in your head right now as you try and understand what I'm saying. So for every word that I speak, hopefully you are retrieving from memory what that word means and putting all this together in order to build some representation that's hopefully meaningful. And if our communication is successful, then the representation that starts in my head reasonably closely will match the representation that will end up in your head, and we can have a meaningful discussion, meaningful dialogue. So to understand words, at a basic level, three things need to happen. Whether you're listening or reading, you need to identify which words are present. So have I said the word bark, or have I said the word park? You need to work out exactly which word it is I've said, or if you're reading, which word it is that's printed on the page. Once you know which word it is, you need to retrieve from your memory what that word means. So over your lifetime of experience with English, you will have built a kind of mental dictionary of what words mean. And in order to understand me, you have to retrieve that meaning and have it active in your mind. And then you have to combine these together. You know, words, single words are not very communicatively useful. It's when we combine them together into complex sentences that things really start to get exciting. So these are the three processes that must be going on in some way in order for you to understand me. I'm not going to talk about that first one. I could give you a talk, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to talk about the third one. The focus of this talk is going to be entirely on this middle stage. How it is, once you know which word has been said, that you know what it means. Now, intuitively, that seems to be like the easy bit of the process. But what I hope I'm going to argue is that actually it's quite complicated, and actually you're all a lot cleverer than you think you are. So how do we do this? Well, here at UCL, we're incredibly lucky. We have lots of really cool kit. We have several of these fMRI scanners where we can put people in a scanner and get them to listen to speech or read speech and find out which bits of the brain are more engaged and more active when you're understanding words that are difficult. And there's some blobs at the front and some other blobs at the back that we know represent this process of retrieval of word meanings. We also have some other cool kit called MEG, which allows us to look at the time course of these effects. So what's plotted here in the red is an average response to listening to some hard words, versus in the blue, an average response listening to some easy words. And we can look at the difference and see, you know, where are these differences happening in the brain and when are these differences happening in the brain. Fine. The Lunch Hour Lecture team wouldn't let me bring an MEG machine or an fMRI machine to the lecture theatre. And frankly, the people who are in charge of these machines weren't so keen on the idea. So I'm going to try and demonstrate some of the basic properties of the language processing system using one of my all-time favourite pieces of kit, the pen and paper. So, does everybody have a pen or a pencil to hand? We have plenty of spares if you don't have a pen or a paper, just wave your hand in the air and an assistant will magically appear. Can we have some pencils passed out? I gave a box out. If you have multiple ones, share with a friend. Let's all be friendly UCL people. Marvellous. It's not the end of the world if for a couple of short people can use their phones, but it's much more fun with an actual piece of paper and a pencil. Are we nearly there? Okay, just keep your hand up if there's a problem. I'm going to keep talking. Right, you don't need paper, you just need a piece of pencil. Just a pencil at the moment. Okay, I'm going to give you a piece of paper. We're going to pass these out. For the moment, when we pass out the paper, I don't want you to look at it yet. So when you receive your piece of paper, just cover it up with your hand. Okay? So if my assistants could now shift to handing out pieces of paper, take a piece of paper, pass it along the row, but don't have a look at it quite yet. Okay? So put a pile at the end of each row and pass it on. Those of you watching online, sorry for the slight delay, just, kind of hum amongst yourselves or something. So everybody should have one piece of paper and cover it up as soon as you receive it. Okay, wave your hands in the air if you do not yet have a piece of paper. We've got a few missing down the front, Emma, and a few up in the top corner. Okay, the task we're going to do today is a favourite of psychologists with a long and illustrious history called the word association task. So, when I let you look at your piece of paper, which isn't yet, you'll see a list of words written down, and all I want you to do is to write down the first word that comes to your mind that's related in some way to that word. So, for example, if I say potato, you might say roast, or you might say garden, or you might say brown, or you might say eh. I don't mind what you say as long as it's related in some way to the word that you've read. Importantly, I am never going to ask for these pieces of paper at the end, so you don't need to be embarrassed about what you write down. I'm going to ask you some questions about what you've written, but I'm not actually going to ask you exactly what your response was. Don't overthink it, do it as quickly as you can, just go down the piece of paper as fast as you can. Importantly, the piece of paper has two sides. Make sure you're doing the side that's labelled Task 1. When you get to the end, please put your hands on your head so that I know you're done. Task 1, word association. On your marks, get set, go. Quick as you can. How speedy are UCL staff and students? Nice and quick. Ah, someone's finished. Yes, hands on head. Excellent. Quick, quick, quick. You're going to run out of time. I need like a countdown counter, don't I? Okay, marvellous. So, we've done the word association. That was task 1. You can now take your hands off your head. I just like doing that because, it makes me laugh. Right, we're going to move on to task 2 now. No writing. Just listen carefully. Listen carefully both to who is speaking and what they're saying.
Mark hopes to become a professional tennis player. He practices on court at his club with his coach most days. His strongest weapon on court is his serve. He regularly gets out of trouble in a match with an ace on his serve. In his last match, Mark saved 3 set points with an ace.
Excellent. I will be asking you questions later. Right, we now do the third and final task. This is exactly like task 1, but it's on the other side of the piece of paper. So when I say go, just turn the piece of paper on and over and do exactly what you did. Same thing with the hands on your head. On your marks, get set, go. Marvellous. Right. So what was all this about? You can take your hands down now. Let's think about what we listened to in task 2. This is the text. Now, I hope most of you would agree that this was relatively easy to understand. There were maybe some specialist terms that you may have struggled with. Can you remember what the topic of this... Oh, I've shown it to you already. That was a mistake. What was the topic? Tell me what the topic was. Doesn't matter. What was the topic? In a word. Tennis. Marvellous. Anybody spot the speaker? Jenni Murray. Well, it's Jenni Murray from Radio 4. Okay, so I hope you agree that this was something that wasn't too taxing, even for lunchtime. But if you look carefully at the text, you'll notice something interesting. This short paragraph is packed full of words that have multiple interpretations. So, for example, a match can refer to something you can strike to light a fire. Court could refer either to a legal court or possibly the past tense of the word catch. Set here is used in a very specific tennis-related meaning, which is very low frequency compared to the other ways we might use the word set. Club could refer to like a golf club that you would hit the ball with. And actually, this entire paragraph is absolutely loaded with these ambiguous words, where there's an alternative meaning that is not relevant. And so to understand this, you're having to rule out all these possible meanings that you all know, but are not relevant in the moment. This is actually reasonably typical of language. And to make this point that this isn't just a strange paragraph written by a freaky psycholinguist, we can look at this reading comprehension test. So this, any of you who know kids who've just gone up to secondary school this term, this is the reading comprehension test that they will have sat at the end of primary school back just before the summer. So this is a text that the government believes that a 10 to 11-year-old ought to be able to understand reasonably easily. And if we look at the first sentence of this text, we can see that, again, this text is packed full of ambiguity, packed full of meanings that you're having to reject as you go along. So to understand this, the child has to realize that dawn does not refer to the name of a child or girl. Casting is being used in a metaphorical sense here, not the physical action, for example, of casting a fishing rod. Spun is not the past tense of the physical motion to spin. Gold refers to the color and not the material. Threads, again, a very metaphorical sense of the word thread. Over is not being used in the more common meaning as in a match might be over, might be completed. And probably hardest for the child, the word game, which has a very high frequency meaning, like a sports game, a football game, is being used in a very low frequency sense. So just to navigate that first line of text in this child-friendly, apparently, text, you have to rule out all these alternative meanings and find a pathway through that makes sense. So most words are ambiguous. So in order to understand any naturally occurring language, you have to select the appropriate meaning as you go along. And you're all doing this all the time, automatically, easily, and without realizing it. The occasions in which you make a mistake are incredibly rare. Not the vast majority of times you encounter a word, you will get the meaning intended by the speaker. And it's not just the case that most words are ambiguous, it's the case that some words are incredibly ambiguous. So if you look up a word like right in a dictionary, you'll find this whole list of different possible interpretations. Now, some of these are quite similar to each other, but these distinctions can be really important. For example, if I was to say something like the Conservative Party is on the right, you wouldn't want to misinterpret that and use the meaning that I might use in a sentence like the Conservative Party is in the right. So although these meanings can be subtly different, they can be very important. So the task of today is for me to give you an overview of what it is you're doing when you encounter a word like trunk that allows you to quickly, automatically, and without effort, get to the right meaning. Another way of saying this is what factors change your behavior, what factors influence how easily you can get to a meaning. Now, if I gave you 5 minutes to talk amongst yourself and to tell me what the answer is, I'm sure most of you would say, well, it's all about the context. It's all about the sentence context in which the word occurs. And this is absolutely true. We sometimes say context is king. The sentence context is what tells you with a fairly high degree of certainty which meaning I intended. So if I have a sentence like containing the word bark, which is ambiguous, it would mean something different in the bark of the tree versus the bark of a dog. And it's that meaning of that final word in the sentence that's telling you with a really high degree of certainty which meaning I intended as the speaker. So this is the most important cue. But what we know from lots of experiments is if you were only relying on this, comprehension would be slow and effortful. And actually, you've got a lot of other little statistical cues that help you get to the right meaning quickly, efficiently, and without too much distress. I'm going to whiz through 3 such factors, and hopefully, if you've all behaved yourself while doing the experiment, I can illustrate these factors using your performance on the word association tasks. So, we know that people's recent experience with words is important. We know that people's long-term experience with words is important. And we know that people's knowledge about who is speaking or who is writing can be important. So, let's go through these one at a time. This is where we find out, will the experiments work? They never all work. Whenever I do these in public, some of them work, some of them don't. So let's see how many we can get to go. Right. Context. One of the words I gave you all was palm. I think it's item 6 on your list. Okay? So palm has two relatively common meanings, two meanings that we would expect most people to know. It can refer to a type of tree, or it can refer to a part of a hand. Now, most of you will have just gone for one of these meanings pretty quickly and effortlessly. The title of my talk might have made you get a bit metalinguistic-y and overthinking and academic-y, but if you were just a participant in my experiment, you would most likely just go straight for one meaning without thinking too hard. So I'd like you to write an A or a B next to your response, depending whether you think you were thinking of the tree or the hand. So most of you will have said something like tree or hand or finger or something like that. And from your response, you should be able to reconstruct which meaning you were thinking of. And we use word association because it's just a nice, quick way of forcing people to choose one meaning or the other and then give us some evidence about what they were thinking. So everybody coded their response. Some of you may not be an A or B. You may have a different meaning, a lower frequency meaning of palm, or you may have just, not got there. That's fine. So what do I think is going on? Well, both of these meanings are reasonably frequent, so I would expect to see some of both sorts of these responses from any audience. But I'm going to make a prediction now. We like predictions because we're scientists. I'm going to predict that there's going to be quite a lot of tree responses if you're sitting to my left. And I'm going to predict there's going to be a lot of hand responses if you're sitting to my right. Oh, magic. Right, let's see. Can we have a show of hands if you are an A, if you're a tree person? Oh, we've got lots of A's. Oh, I think we're doing all right. Right, let's have the A's down. Let's look at the B's. Oh. I need to do some taking pictures and counts. I think we do have a, is this the eye of faith? I think we've got a shift. Yeah? So we're talking grades here. We're never going to flip you all, because you're all individuals and you all have your own individual language experience. But I think we do have a shift from left to right. What I should do is take some pictures and then count. No, anyway, moving on. Right, so I believe we saw a bit of a shift, but if we do this in experimental conditions, I can count and do stats and show you a p-value, and then we'll know it's all true. Right, so what did I do? Well, I cheated slightly and gave you slightly different bits of paper. Okay? So the people on the left, and this is where we check that everybody got the right pieces of paper, because if you got the wrong pieces of paper, then we're in trouble. So the people on the left should have had words like tropical before palm, whereas the people on the right should have had words like fingerprint before palm. And the idea was that this would prime you towards interpreting one way or the other. And it's, this isn't a strong sentence context, so if I'd given you something like, I was drinking a cocktail while sitting under the palm, you would have all gone that way, but I was trying to be a little bit more subtle. So these cues, you have a preference, you come into the experiment with your own kind of lifetime experience, but we can nudge these by changing the context. We also know that recent experience with the particular word matters. So the kind of context effects I was just talking about, those are gone in a second or so. You're only going to see effects of words that will occur kind of within a paragraph or sentence distance. But you can get much longer lasting biases if you actually repeat the word. So the next word I want you to look at your responses for was item 2, which was ace, which can refer to a tennis serve or a playing card. Ace actually has a lot of other meanings. Like a flying ace, or he was ace, a kind of slang meaning. So only code yourself if you've given something related to the tennis meaning or the playing card meaning. So give yourself an A or a B. Okay. Now if you look at the UK population as a whole, the playing card meaning is much more frequent. So as a whole, I would predict that we're going to see quite a lot of Bs. So can we have a show of hand for Bs? Yeah, so we've got quite a lot of Bs. Right, hands down. I'm predicting not so many A's, but I'm predicting more A's over there. Okay, so can we have a show of hands for A's? Right, that one's definitely worked. We've definitely got a bunch of A's over there. If I just look at the kind of bits, people on the fringes, we've got very few A's over there and quite a lot of A's over there. Right, can anybody figure out what I was up to with ace? How did I get these people? So the tennis meaning really is quite low frequency. How did I encourage quite a lot of these people to give more of a tennis-related meaning?
The same thing that you gave a different word for. You gave blue in mind, which is a colour.
I think I gave you all blue before ace. Yeah, everybody got blue before ace? Yep, the back. Yes. 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 It wasn't so much the context and the topic, it was the fact that when you all listened to Jenni Murray, she used the word ace twice to mean the tennis meaning. You guys did ace in task 1 before you listened to Jenni Murray. You guys did ace in task 2 after you listened to Jenni Murray. So by listening to Jenni Murray, use the word ace twice within a short little bit of text. Even though you'd encountered some other words afterwards, it was enough just to nudge the availability of that meaning up slightly and make it more likely that you interpret it in that way. Well done. Can we do that in questions? Marvellous. Okay, and this is something that we've done lots of experiments on. We've looked, so the text that you heard, which is here, was the exact same text we used in an experiment that we did in collaboration with BBC Radio 4, which is why we have Jenni Murray's voice. So we got listeners on the radio to listen to this text, and then we asked them to log onto our website and do the word association task that you've just done, but with lots more words to kind of distract from the aim. Because I'm sure some of you over there, when you got to ace, probably thought, oh yeah, I know what she's up to. But when we do the proper experiment, we put lots of fillers, we disguise it better, and it's not so obvious. And so they logged on online and did a word association task, and we were able to recruit 2,500 people to do our experiment within a day or two, which gives us lots of lovely data. I'm going to show you a graph now. I'm sorry if anyone's allergic to graphs. So this is the data from that experiment. So what we're plotting up is the change in behaviour, the proportion to which we've nudged people to giving these tennis-related meanings. And they weren't all tennis, there were lots of other items as well. Don't worry about the dotty lines, those are just there for people who care about confidence intervals. What you care about is the dark solid line, and that shows how this nudge in performance starts off quite big, so within kind of 20 minutes we're showing quite a big shift in performance, but it washes out relatively quickly. So we can plot how you use your recent experience and what the time course is. And this makes communicative sense. You know, think about why this would help. If I'm having a conversation with you about tennis and I've used the word ace, and then 2 minutes later I use the word ace again, even though that's a low frequency meaning, chances are I probably mean the same thing I meant 2 minutes ago. It's much less likely that I've switched from tennis to cards than that I've stayed on topic. So you can think of this as a way of making these low frequency, difficult words a little bit easier by being biased by your recent experience with them. But we know that recent experience isn't everything. Long-term experience really matters as well. Now, obviously, I only have half an hour, so I can't do a long-term experiment on you. But we should get some insights into what's going on from your responses to the word tube. So tube has a kind of cluster of meanings relating to being a cylindrical container, so test tubes, toothpaste tubes, and so on. But it also has the subway underground meaning. Now, that meaning A is much, much more common if I look at the UK population as a whole. So if I was to do this experiment in my home Cambridgeshire village, I would expect to see, nearly 100% of people would give me that, particularly if I excluded people who work in London. But we're in London, so I would expect to see a few more of these Bs. So if I could just have a show of hand for anybody who went for the underground meaning. Yeah, so there's quite a lot. So this is the effect on your brain of living in London. And I'm sure we could look more fine-grained. So those of you who regularly travel on the tube, I'm sure would 100% give that meaning, whereas those of you who maybe work in a chemistry lab but own a bicycle might be slightly different. So what this shows is that your availability of these meanings varies according to your long-term experience with these words. And again, this is communicatively useful. The more often you encounter a meaning, the more likely that meaning is to occur in your future. And we've done some experiments on this, and we focused on rowers. Now, rowers are a really nice group because rowers have a very specific rowing-related vocabulary. And because rowing is not something that there's much coverage on the TV, anybody who doesn't row, we wouldn't expect to have this vocabulary. So we can't use something like football, because everybody knows about football words. You can't avoid it. But there's words like square, feather, catch, finish. Any rowers in the audience? Could you tell me what the word feather means, for example? Exactly, so it's a position of the blade. It means your blade, your oar, is parallel to the water, whereas square means it's right angles. Yes, parallel to the water, perpendicular, thank you. So these are all everyday words that we have a rowing-related meaning for. And what we can do is focus in on our group of rowers, and again, get them to lots of web-based experiments to see how available these word meanings are to them. And what we find is their recent experience, as in the previous experiment, really matters. So these words come more easily to mind if they happen to have been rowing that day versus if they haven't been rowing that day. But there's also an incremental long-term effective experience. So the longer you've been rowing, the more years experience you have, the more readily these meanings come to mind when you're in one of our word association games. Interestingly, there's a negative age effect. So if you take rowing experience into account, so if, say, you compare somebody with a year's rowing experience who might be 18 versus somebody with a year's experience who might be 50, you'll find that the 18-year-old that year of experience will have had more impact than the older listener. Now, there's two ways of looking at that. You can either say, oh, isn't it wonderful, all these young people are nice and flexible and plastic and they can adapt to their environment. Or you could look at it the other way around and say the older listeners just have a bigger wealth of linguistic experience with which to integrate the small little bit of recent history. So it's not just what we've heard in the last 20 minutes that matters, it matters how we encounter these words over our lifetime. And clearly this makes sense. If we take up a new academic subject, a new hobby, we want our mental dictionary to be flexible. We don't want to be stuck with the representations that we developed when we were 18, and then when we're not 18, trying to interpret the world in the way that suited those representations. As adults, our representations are fluid, they're flexible, we update them on the basis of our linguistic experience. And again, this helps comprehension. It means that when I'm in a statistics class with my undergraduates, I've got a fighting chance of them having the right meaning for a word like normal or significant. We need people to be able to adapt to a changing linguistic environment. Right, I need to be quick because the experiment took slightly longer than I hoped. The third thing I just want to touch on, which I can't demonstrate here because it would require me to do ridiculous accents, and that's just not happening, is what would happen if we heard a word like coach spoken by somebody with an American accent. Would we access preferentially the sports coach meaning versus if we heard it with somebody in a British accent? And there are actually quite a lot of words that have different properties and different groups of speakers use them differently. I'm going to focus on accent, but a very similar argument can be made in terms of age and possibly gender. People use words differently, and as listeners we are sensitive to that. So this again is a word association experiment. I'm just going to show you the data. So we're giving them words like coach that have British meanings and American meanings. And what I'm plotting is the proportion of people who gave the American meaning. So if we give some UK participants words like coach, you can see this is quite low. They don't give many American meanings, and that makes sense. It's low frequency to them. Whereas if we give them to American people, obviously that's high. And that's just an extreme version of the tube effect, that the American participants are more exposed to one meaning than the other. What's interesting is this is data when they listen to it spoken by somebody like me with a British accent. The question, what happens if they hear these words spoken in an American accent? For the American participants, it makes no difference whatsoever, presumably because they have a relatively limited experience with British English. But for our British participants, we're not making them American, we're not totally turning them into American listeners, but we're just nudging them up slightly. So just like what we saw earlier, where we're just nudging people's preferences slightly, people are taking into account the distributional properties, the way in which these words get used in their environment. They're sensitive to the fact that American and British speakers use words differently. So, to sum up, understanding the meanings of words is a lot harder than you thought it was. And you guys are a lot cleverer than you thought you were. Context is king. The words that surround the ambiguous word in its immediate sentence context is what's going to ultimately determine which meaning you should retrieve. But on top of this, we're very sensitive to the ways in which words occur in language, and we can use the sensitivity to make certain meanings more or less readily available. And this stops us just getting totally swamped by having hundreds of word meanings clouding our mind for every word we encounter. So fluent, skilled, proficient comprehension, what you're hopefully doing right now, relies on us using all these little statistical cues all at the same time. You're taking into account your recent experience with the ambiguous word. You're taking into account your lifetime of experience with that word. And you're taking into account who it is that's speaking to you. Now, I'm sure there is at least a few of you sitting there going, oh, yeah, that was a reasonably interesting way of passing a lunch hour. But why should we care? Why does any of this matter? And I think the reason it matters I've always thought it mattered, but it became really clear to me in the last year or so when a study was published by Courtney Norbury and her group based here at UCL, who did a population study of reception-aged children in Surrey. They looked at 13,000 kids, and they found a prevalence of language disorders, the prevalence rate at about 10%. So that's 2 to 3 children in every classroom, a reception-aged classroom in the country. And what I would argue, this is children who have language disorder that is severe enough that they can find a measurable impact on their educational outcomes. And the point is, if we want to help these kids, if we want to develop appropriate interventions to improve their language skills, my view is it's completely vital that we understand what's going on in the skilled, proficient adult case. What is it that you guys are doing in your heads that make you so good at language comprehension? So then, how can we help those kids who find language comprehension a little bit more tricky to become as skilled as you guys are? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We do have time for some questions. So can I have some questions? There are mics. There are a couple of questions down here.
Can I just say, if we run out of time for questions, I'm happy to sit on my Twitter account for the afternoon and answer any extra questions that come in. Just use the Lunch Hour Lecture hashtag or tag my Twitter handle and I will reply.
I've just 2 very brief questions. First of all, to say thank you. Sorry, I'm over here. Waving at you.
Oh, hi.
One was that you didn't mention emotion as part of that communication. And the other one was I wondered how much a different first language or mother tongue makes a difference to that interpretation.
2 wonderful questions. So emotion definitely matters. At a very simple level, you could think of emotion as being a bit like the accent effect. So we haven't done it in a proper kind of controlled experiment, but I have had a student project where they looked at the emotional tone of the voice. So I always struggle to think of examples, but something like a word that has an emotionally valenced meaning and a word that has a neutral. You can push people's preferences by saying it in an angry, happy, neutral voice. So I would think of tone of voice as being kind of another contextual cue, a bit like accent, a bit like age, and so on. The other intriguing one there that you didn't ask about, but I just want to mention, is the intriguing possibility that we haven't shown yet is that you might have individual specific effects as well. So I might tune into the way my children or my husband or my friends use words, but that's really hard to show experimentally, so we haven't got there yet. So definitely emotion will be a cue. The other question was bilingualism. This is a great question. So we know that in bilingual listeners, particularly bilingual listeners who have 2 languages that are relatively similar, it's not the case that the bilingual reader or listener can keep their 2 mental dictionaries completely separate and just be in Dutch mode or English mode. We know that the words from the competing language are popping up and interfering. So you can almost think, well, the bilingual listener is going to have a kind of double whammy, if you like, because they're going to be all these other words, but then they will use, again, contextual cues about who it is they're speaking. Are they listening to a Dutch speaker or an English speaker, for example, in order to modulate the availability of those meanings? So they can't switch off their competing lexicon, but they can modulate it so that they have preferential access to the meanings that are triggered by the language that's being used. And there's some really interesting work to be done around code switching when bilinguals are fluently switching between 2 languages and how that interacts with that, but we haven't got there yet. Thank you. Great questions.
There was another question just here. I don't know whether they've... Fine. Okay, that's done. We have a question all the way over there in the corner, at the back.
It's going to be the teaching question, isn't it?
Sorry to interrupt. respect that. Sorry to interrupt you earlier.
No, it's totally fine.
Thank you very much. It was really, really interesting. Just following on from what you said about bilingualism and about second language acquisition, related to education, is there a intersection with gender and sex as well? Because people say, or I've heard some people say, that girls at school are better at languages and boys are better at sciences. But I was never very good at science, and I was better at languages. Now, does that have something to do with my gender or my sex? And would you say that there's a bias at all that you can see in your experiment?
So there is certainly data showing gender differences, sex differences or gender differences in attainment. I think we have no clue whatsoever as to how much of that is driven by any biological innate predispositions and how much of that is due to cultural forces that act on our children from a depressingly young age as to what they should or should not be good at. I think I've not seen, it's very hard to pull those two things apart. I mean, we can show gender differences here in these kinds of studies in terms of how words are used. You know, we know that women in our society use words differently to men. You know, unfortunately, if you hear a word like foundation, there is going to be a gender difference in how those words, on average, are being used at the population level. But that is very different to saying that we've got gender differences in proficiency and skill. And my instinct is that most of the differences we're seeing in attainment are probably culturally driven rather than biologically.
Thank you.
That's an opinion.
Thank you. I believe we do have a Slido question.
Oh, excellent. Slido question. There are people
Hello.
listening.
On behalf of the Slido community, question. Okay, let me get this right. Is long-term experience more impactful than otherwise? So the example given is, in your rowing example, would a 40-year-old rower with 30 years of rowing be more liable to use the feather option than an 18-year-old who's done 1 year of rowing?
Sorry, give me the numbers again.
Yeah, so if I'm 40 years old,
Yep.
I've been rowing for 30 years,
Yep.
and you ask me the word feather,
Yep.
am I more likely to give you the rowing response
Yep.
than an 18-year-old who's only done rowing for 1 year?
Yeah, there'll be
Like
a
a maths
crossover
question.
point. So you've got two things pulling against you. The more experience, the better. The younger you are, the better. And you know, I could probably draw you a plot, but not right now. And you know, there'll be a crossover point where those two things will balance.
And who gets to the station
all
first?
of these things are different constraints pulling you in different directions. And you know, the other thing that will matter for these words is how frequent the other meaning is. So you know, if you're also a bird watcher in your spare time, then that's going to boost your other meaning of feather, which is going to compete. So this is why. So I made some flippant comment about my confidence intervals, and they're quite big. Because people are different, people have their own individual experience. And I can measure kind of one variable, like say, how long have you been rowing? But I can't measure all the other variables that capture your individual linguistic experience. And to me, this is one of the things that makes it a bit of a miracle how well we communicate with each other, is that the representations in my head are not the same as the representations in anybody else's head. Hopefully they're kind of similar enough where we can just about get by having a conversation. But my linguistic experience is unique to me. My collection of hobbies and friends and lifetime experience with language is different and unique. Sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
That's fine. We have one more question here. And then I think that will probably be time to wrap it up.
Just quickly to hear about the nature of the language disorders in these children. What field are they in? I mean, the autistic spectrum, a dyspraxia. What were you referring to?
So that 10% is a kind of a global number, and it will reflect all kinds of different language deficits. Right, you know, we're talking dyslexia, we're talking deficits in the more semantic, pragmatic aspects of language, and a lot of these will co-occur with other things like dyspraxia or being on the autistic spectrum. So there's lots of quite often it doesn't occur in isolation, it'll occur with, in combination with other difficulties. So that's just a number who if you measure their skills on a range of language-based tasks, will be low enough to be of a concern looking forward in terms of their education.
Do you have research on that on your website?
So what I'll do when I'm done is I will link on Twitter, and any of the research I've talked about, I'll put a link up on Twitter. If you're not a Twitter person and that scares you, just drop me an email or, send me a pigeon or something.
I think there is another question there, but I think we're going to have to wrap it up because we have to be out of here by 1:55, and it is now 1:55. So thank you, everybody, and I'm sure you'd like to help me. Thanks.